Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper. Today we're talking about the SSA 6991 constructed response. This is part 3 of our SSA series. Let's get started. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the writing portion of the SSA 6991, also known as the constructed response. I have some tips and tricks for you to try. We're also going to go over the rubric, and I'm going to work through the specific constructed response in the study companion. I'm going to break that down for you today. So let's take a look at the study companion, and I'll link that up in the description below. But remember, this is part 3 of our SSA series. So if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I would recommend going back and looking at those first before watching this video. In this video, we're now on page 27 of the study companion, and we're going to use their constructed response to work through this video. I'm going to use their example here. All right, so we are on page 27 of the study companion. You can see right here, page 27 down here, and it starts off with the scenario documents, and it has questions 31 to 33 here. Those are the constructed response questions. So there are 3 constructed response questions connected to this whole big scenario here, okay? So it starts off here, 31, 32, and 33. Now, before we get started on those questions and even looking at any of this here, I want to go over the rubric so that you know exactly what to do to get a score of a 3. And it's not that difficult. I want you to make this as simple as possible. Okay, so let's take a look at the rubric now. All right, so this is straight from the study companion. This is straight from ETS, and this shows exactly what you need to get a 3. And you want to shoot for a 3 on all 3 of the questions, so 31, 32, and 33, because that'll help you with your overall score. And it's not that difficult to get a 3. Now, the first thing you want to see here is the first bullet. And you can see that the words, they even highlighted them in the study companion. Usually I highlight them, but they even did this here. Detailed and specific. This is a big deal. You need to demonstrate detailed and specific instances in your writing that support what you're trying to do. I have found that often people go into generalizations and kind of summaries of situations when really you got to dig in and talk about specifics. Talk about where the data shows this or where the data shows that, or what studies show, or getting specific on behaviors or goals or whatever it is you're going to be talking about in your constructed response. So be sure you get specific, very granular on that writing assignment. Then it says, and convincing evidence. So we're going to use evidence usually from the constructed response itself. There's going to be some sort of data, some sort of information that you're going to pull information out of that and then use that in your writing. And it's going to be of a grasp of the issues presented in materials and reasonable ways to resolve that. Reasonable is really important here because sometimes people go way overboard in trying to solve these problems. Remember, this is, you're not a superintendent yet. You're trying to become a superintendent. You might have been a principal already. You might have been an assistant principal already. But, we have to figure out reasonable ways in doing this. You're not going to be able to solve all the problems in education in this constructed response. Sometimes the most reasonable thing to do is to collect the data and then work with a team to determine what's going on. You may not solve the entire problem in this one response. So I want you to be open to just being, super reasonable, doing what you can, and not going overboard to try to prove yourself in this constructed response. The other bullet says responds appropriately, and here's the key, to all parts of the question. We're going to talk about that in just a second. We're actually going to start with the task first and then read the scenario, because I find that most people start with the scenario first and then go down and try to finish up, all parts of the questions, and they miss things. So I want to make sure we get that down. So we're going to start with the task first, and that'll help you with the second bullet here. The third bullet is applies appropriate knowledge of underlying processes to address issues or various points of view. Various points of view is important here because you are the superintendent of an entire community. You're not just going to have, an administrative point of view. You need to think of it through the lens of the parent, the student, maybe different cultures, different genders, people with different, priorities. You might have, affluent people in your school district. You might have students or parents and community members from lower socioeconomics. So you need to, be putting on all those hats and looking through all those different lenses, which can be challenging, but that's your job as the superintendent. You are basically the community leader. So really, this is about being culturally responsive. And you are going to want to, really have an understanding of what's going on in your community with all community members, not just the ones who are the loudest at the school board meetings, everybody, all right? Then the next bullet is applies appropriate knowledge to resolve conflict in a reasonable way. So you're resolving conflict is literally like your entire job. There are conflicts all over the district and you're going to have to resolve them. And again, in a reasonable way, there's only so much you can do. The next bullet is, when required, provides detailed, specific, and convincing explanation or rationale. This is always required. I know it says when required, but as far as I'm concerned, if you want a 3 on this, you're going to need to keep this in mind at all times. Detailed and specific and convincing explanation and rationale. And really, you can do that by just saying, because the data shows this, we're going to do this. It's as easy as that. Just connect your action to what you found in the data, and that'll help you to make decisions and explain your rationale. And then the last bullet is contains terminology or processes that demonstrate an in-depth understanding of the role of the superintendent. So this is where your good words come in. So things like community outreach, data-driven decisions, needs assessment, positive behavior support, all of these buzzwords that a superintendent should know, especially when talking about the community and helping the community. So you want to really focus in on those good words that we talked about, during the multiple choice. You want to kind of implement them in your writing. Now, they need to be implemented in an authentic way. You don't want to just have like random good words out there to try to get them into your paragraphs. You want to make sure they're applicable to what you're talking about. But this is your chance to show what you know. Data-driven decision-making, needs assessment, community outreach, positive behavior support, professional development, cultural responsiveness. You need to weave in those good words into your solutions and into your constructed response so the grader knows that you have an understanding of the role of the superintendent. All right, so again, we're on page 27 of this, and you will see that we have this big, long scenario here, and it says, refer to the following scenario and documents, and here it has a list of documents, so it looks like we have 3 documents for this particular constructed response, and then as you get down, you get to the questions 31, 32, and 33. Now in my presentation, what I've done is I've taken this document and I've made screenshots so I can put it in my presentation and write on it. So I'm gonna leave this study companion right now and I'm gonna go into my presentation, but I just wanted you to know that it's basically this whole thing just broken up into little chunks. All right, so you can see here, this is the scenario. Here are the explanation of documents. Then we have documents 1, 2, 3. And then we get into our questions, 31, 30, well, that's the answer to 31, 32, hang on, 32, and 33. Now, what I think is very important for you to do is to look at the questions first and figure out the task at hand first, at least for the first question. Obviously, you're not going to be able to remember all of these, but you have scratch paper. So I think it's really important to take a look at each question and write down exactly what you need to do. So let's take a look at question number 31. All right, so it'll be somewhere, you're taking this test online, so you're going to have all these documents, and then you're going to see the question 31. Here's the most important thing here. This and this. These are your tasks. Remember in the rubric, it says, make sure you address everything in the questions or in the task. So let's make sure we do that. Let's read those 2 things. Here it says, identify 2 sources of data that the needs assessment should examine, describe the data, and the data gathering method. Very important here. You're not just talking about 2 sources of data. Describe the data and the data gathering. So I'm going to make sure, that I'm able to check that off when I'm done writing, because We're not just talking about two sources of data. We're talking about how we're going to collect that data and how it's going to be used, basically. And then it says for each source, so for each of the two sources, explain how the data will help to address the problem of gangs in the district schools. Now, this is already giving me an insight of what this is going to be about here. I see the word gangs here. I haven't read the constructed response yet. I went straight to my task first. All right, so now that I have these two bullets here and I have an understanding of what's going on, let's read this question here, or this particular item. Mr. Giraldo acknowledges that any prevention programs in schools should be based on an assessment of the specific nature of the problem that gangs present in the school and the local community. He begins the process of addressing the problem of gangs in Braxton schools by conducting a needs assessment. So here we have our needs assessment, and we know that number one is always going to be data collection. Now, data collection could be, numbers, what's going on in terms of, we're talking about gangs here. So it could be discipline referrals, things like that. Could also be surveys. It could be interviews. It could be all kinds of things. But we have to collect that data and analyze it to determine, number one, if there's a problem, and number two, where the problem is specifically, and possibly how we're going to address that problem, all right? So for 31, I need to think about, okay, what two sources of data, and I can see right now gangs is part of this, so I'm thinking discipline data, probably achievement data, maybe even arrest data in the community. We're gonna need to work with law enforcement here because gangs go beyond the school grounds. This is now a community issue. So that is what I'm thinking about right here. And how would we collect that? Well, obviously collecting discipline data is relatively easy, but collecting arrest data, we might need to form a partnership with the police department, and you can get that data if you need that in your district. All right, let's take a look at 32 just to get an idea of the next question we're going to need to be thinking about. And here are basically the two bullets. Identify and describe two policies, procedures, or actions that Mr. Giraldo can implement to reduce the potential for gang and other violence in or around district schools. So we collected the data in 31. We're analyzing the data. Now we're making a decision. This is a decision. All right, what two decisions, two policies, procedures are? Here it is, just actions. This is a decision. It doesn't necessarily have to be a policy that fixes gangs, like, oh, done, gangs are over. We just fixed it. That may not be the situation here. So it's really just the decisions you're making. And then for each one of those decisions, and there are going to be two, you need to present the justification. So that's easy. That's by just saying, because the data shows this, we're going to do that. And you connect the data and the decision. For the effectiveness of the policy, procedure, or action for reducing gang violence or other violence in and around district schools. Okay, let's read this part. I always work backwards. I read the bullets first. Mr. Giraldo responds to documents 1 and 2 in part by examining the measures the district is taking to ensure the safety of students when they are on school property and when attending classes. Good. Now remember, we're talking about gangs here. I can already tell by just reading the bullets. And we are in charge of them when they're on school property. We can't really do much about community policing. We can get out into the community and work with the community, but we only have control, and we don't have much control even in this situation, on school grounds. So we need to do what we can with the school community first, and that's what this is going to be about here. And then the last question is, identify and describe two factors, again we have two, so it's 2, 2, and 2, that put students at risk for gang involvement. For each factor, suggest an action Mr. Giraldo can take to mitigate it. So again, two things that would drive a student to join a gang, and how can we step in and stop that? All right, so if I was gonna write down some quick notes, and of course you have that scratch paper and you're going to wanna use it to kind of map your strategy here, what I would do is break down each question, and this is all before I've ever read the scenario, okay? I wanna know what my task is. So for question 31, let's take a look at my poorly written notes, but they're my notes, and yours are probably gonna be equally messy, and it's okay. 31, I need two pieces of data and how we obtain that data. The second piece of 31 is how will that data help, okay? That'll take care of 31. 32 is 2 policies I'm going to implement once I've looked at that data, and then I'm going to connect those decisions to the data as a rationale. So that's 32. And 33, 2 reasons why students join gangs and what we can do to prevent that. And that says prevention there. Okay. So that's basically, I want to be able to go check, 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 and be done with the constructed response. Okay. Once I've done that, I know that I have done everything. Now, here's the other thing. We don't want to go off into a tangent somewhere else. This map will help us stay on track. So I recommend for sure jotting down a quick outline. Like you can see, this is not even a really in-depth outline. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullets, 2 for each question. And when I can just focus my writing, it's going to be so much better. Here's this thing I see a lot when leaders write for these exams. You guys have a tendency to go on and on and on. And I'm not saying this in a mean way. It's because you have a lot of knowledge and you want to show that you are qualified to be a superintendent or to be a principal or to be an assistant principal, whatever it may be. And so you really want to show that you know what you're talking about. And so you write way too much. And what happens is the reader, the grader of this essay, gets completely overwhelmed. Think about it. If you were grading a person's essay and you got 4 pages of explanation, you're going to be like, oh my God, it's just too much. So if you can map your thoughts using an outline like I did here, you're going to keep your essay nice and succinct, concise, and hit those points that you need in order to get the 3, but you don't go off into la la land and end up with a dissertation on this topic. You're not going to have time to go on and on. Keep it short and sweet, and mapping it out like this will help you do that. Okay, so now that we've kind of mapped what we're going to do, we understand our task, now we can get into the actual question and the scenario of what's going on. So I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it in the study companion, and that's linked up in the description. But let me just summarize this particular situation here. So Mr. Geraldo is the new superintendent of a relatively small school district. There are 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. So the majority of kids are in the elementary school, and there's only 1 middle and one high school. The last 5 years have seen an increase in gang activity. According to the data, 15% of the student body identify as gang members, which according to federal guidelines does mean that the district has heavy gang activity. All right. Previous district and building level administrators have been reluctant to acknowledge a gang problem, but the parents and the community is kind of saying, hey, we need to get this under control. Okay. So notice we kind of have a mingling of situations here. We have the school and we have the community. And we kind of have this situation with gangs, right? And so you're the leader of the school district. And so it's your job to kind of bring community and school together to solve this problem. Remember, we're constantly thinking about the community as a whole. All right, so it says here, 15% of the student body identify as gang participants. Now, I'm just gonna say something here. Just because 15% of the student body identifies as gang participants does not mean that 15% of the student body is really in gangs. Students have a tendency when they're surveyed to, kind of embellish stories, right? Kind of embellish maybe their involvement. So while this is, students identifying as gangs, what we really need is some hard data. Like, what does the data say here? That's my immediate thing, because you're surveying students and saying, are you in a gang? Well, some of them are going to say, yeah, I'm in a gang, right? And the real gang members are going to say, I'm not in a gang. I mean, so this is kind of like, where did we get this data? What kind of measure are we using here? But that's just my own researcher brain going there, okay? Now, the next part, and if you were looking through the study companion, you would see the next part is the documents you're going to get. So here we have, the first document is going to be an excerpt, Sunday feature of the Braxton Times. A newspaper article. 2, email from the presidents of the PTO. And 3, demographics of the Braxton School District. All right. So let's take a look at those now. Okay. So you can see here, this is an excerpt from the Sunday feature, Braxton Times. Now, listen, Just like I have to fill this YouTube channel with content, so does the newspaper here in Braxton County. So while I think it's important that you have a pulse on what the media is saying, we need to make sure that this is not part of the data collection. The media love to write stories about gangs in schools. And I remember when I was an assistant principal at a high school here, a lot of the media said that, our school was a gang school, and we weren't. We were just a school that had low socioeconomic students from low socioeconomic neighborhoods, and we had a lot of diversity in our school. So of course, a lot of times that is labeled as a troubled school or a gang school. So I would take this article with a grain of salt. It's important to read it. It's important to know what the media is saying about you. However, this is not data collection, okay? So it goes in, gang activity in the United States is unlimited in its reach. I mean, it's very kind of doom and gloom here. They do quote a school resource officer here. And it does talk about, young people come to schools from various cultures or countries. This feels a little bit, I don't know. I don't like how this is written. I would probably read this and say, okay, I'm going to go collect my own data now. So, but it's important to read it for this particular session, but I'm going to go ahead and move on here. Now, this is an email from the presidents of the parent-teacher organizations. Now, again, who is part of the parent-teacher organizations? I think that's really important to understand. Is this a representation of the entire community, or is this just a representation of those who are able to be part of the PTO? Remember, a lot of times people who are part of the PTO typically are the people who have time to be part of the PTO. They're not working two jobs. They're not, working late at night. Not that PTOs are not important and the work that these parents do is not amazing and important, but this is just a piece of the community here. And so you can see that the email is titled Gang Activity in Braxton, and it says, for several years, the Joint PTOs of Braxton have petitioned the district to increase its response to gang activity in schools. We have shared our observations. Well, I'm not sure what their observations are, but remember, observations is just one piece of data. And as for leadership and support from schools, we believe that the half-hearted response from the previous administration has allowed student involvement in gangs to increase. Now, this could be true, right? It could be that the leadership before you, you're Mr. Geraldo here, didn't really do enough to prevent gangs. But again, this is an email from the PTO presidents. Like the media release or the newspaper article, this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, and you need to do your own investigation. The PTOs are hoping that a new administration will take our concerns seriously. As such, we are making available to you all resources at our disposal. Okay. We freely give you access to our PTO meetings and sponsored activities, funding to hire speakers and counselors, and time and efforts of our members. We await your direction in using the resources of the joint PTOs. Okay, well, the resources might be money. I might need some money. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But that's very nice of the PTO. They're not just yelling at you as the new leader and saying, get rid of these gangs in schools. They're actually saying, we have resources. We want to share them with you. Okay, good, constructive. Now let's move on to the demographics. Now this is important, but again, we don't want to overgeneralize. Just because a school has a high economically disadvantaged population does not mean that there's a gang problem, okay? We want to make sure that we're being strategic and surgical in our data analysis. So this is a big piece of the data here. So we have female to male, we have more males to females, okay? We have a pretty high number of economically disadvantaged students. So that probably means, and again, anecdotally, that the PTO is probably not made up of many of the people who are economically disadvantaged. Now, that could be a generalization on my part. I might have to work on some data collection in that area as well. Students in special education, 43%. So almost half the district is in special education, a challenge. English language learners, 27%, right? Homeless, 1%. Students in foster care, 11%. That's a lot of kids in foster care. Military connected migrant students. We have African American and Hispanic students are 49.5 and 29.5 respectively, and white students are 13%. Asian, and then we go down into our demographics here. Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, American Indian, and 2 or more races is 2%. So really, we're looking here. We have a diverse student population. And again, when we're talking about gangs and we're talking about, students of color, we need to be careful that we collect our data and we don't make assumptions just based on, implicit bias that we have, right? So this is a snapshot of the demographics. This doesn't tell us anything about gangs, right? So now let's take a look at our first question here. And we already talked about this. The 2 things we're going to do for question number 31 is we're going to identify 2 sources of data that the needs assessment should examine. So we have all this anecdotal data and demographic data, but we don't have the hard data to tell me what's going on with gangs and discipline data and things like that. We're also going to describe how we gather that, what's the gathering method, and for each source explain how that would work. Now let's take a look at their response to the first part of that question is, what piece of data? So this is the first piece of data. Now, a couple things I want to show you here. First of all, this is in bullets. You can use bullets for this task. In fact, I encourage you to use bullets for this task because it's going to make it easier on the grader to check off when you're doing things correctly and when you hit the points on that rubric. So please do not write an 8-paragraph thing for this. Bullets is great. Now, this is actually a lot of bullets. I might even reduce that down, and I actually did my own for this. I'm going to show you that in a second. But notice here we have a quick little, sentence explaining, and it says, the first piece of data the superintendent should request is a building by building detailed breakdown of discipline referrals. So discipline referrals is the first piece of data. So that checks off that first, and let me go back to that. That checks off this first part of the 2 sources. That's the first source, all right? Now what we're going to do is identify why that's important and how we're going to collect that. So what do we want? We want a minimum of the last 3 years. Why do we need 3 years? Well, it says it right here, to identify trends. 1 year's worth of data is not going to show you much. You need to see those lines. If those lines are going up in terms of discipline referrals, then we may have a problem. But you may pull the discipline and see that the line is going down. It may contradict what's going on with the PTO or what the newspaper is saying, okay? So minimum 3 years is good. I would say 5 years is better, but it's good that they said minimum 3 years. Now, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. For whatever constructed response you get, you can use that line, minimum of 3 years, because that's just good old-fashioned data collection. You've got a lot of data to work with. Here's another good word, disaggregated by subgroups. Use those words when you're talking about getting the data. Definitely. That should be part of your good word vocabulary when you're talking about data analysis and making decisions. And then it says here, indicated in document 1 to identify groups at risk. So document 1 was all about, the explanation of that the school had, 15% of kids identifying as gangs and things like that. And so we also want to take a look at subgroups, male, female, Black, Hispanic, white, low socioeconomic, special ed, all those things. Disaggregate it and figure out, what's going on there. That's really important. That's getting strategic. That's digging down into the data. Then we have the types of infraction. So now we're getting even digging down deeper. I'm talking about discipline referrals, but notice I'm hitting that bullet saying, okay, this is how I'm going to collect it, and this is what I'm going to extract from it. Obviously, types of infractions, because chewing gum in class is not gang activity. But bringing a knife to school could be connected to gang activity. So making sure we're disaggregating even more in terms of types of infraction, the consequences and infractions to determine whether the consequences are equitable. Good words there when we're talking about, discipline referrals. Here's one: percentage of time when parental contact was made, percentage of responses from the parental contact, percentage of times follow-up action was taken by schools. See, I think this is one of the most important bullets here. Do we follow up? A lot of times we get busy, we give the kids a referral, and we never follow up on what's going on and how the kids are doing. We just suspend them and they come back, and we suspend them and they come back. This is why I really like this last bullet here. And we want to figure out the extent and the nature of school-home partnerships. That's that community there, okay? So remember, I need 2 pieces of data. This is just the first one I'm explaining here, all right? So I like it. Now, I want to go over why they're helpful, and that's the second part of the question. These data are helpful to anticipate future action based on trends. That's where that 3-year data came in. Plan targeted interventions. That should always be part of it. That can be applicable to any constructed response you get. Plan targeted interventions is just good old-fashioned leadership. So make sure that's in one of your bullets somewhere. Revise or strengthen disciplinary procedures. Okay, perhaps. Maybe the data is telling you we need a little more action in the disciplinary field. To establish or strengthen parental involvement. So those last 3 bullets there where we've determined if the parents were called, determined if there was any follow-up, that's where this bullet comes in. To plan parenting programs. Now, I have a little bit of an issue with this one. I would not include this, and I'm going to go into that why, because I'm going to show you what my bullets would be. We don't know, you're jumping the gun here. You're saying that parents, they don't know how to be parents. That may not be the problem. So I think that bullet is kind of jumping the gun and could be off-putting to many community members. So I would probably leave that bullet out. But the last bullet, to establish or strengthen school-home partnerships. That I like. Okay, but that second to last bullet, I would leave off, and I would not do that right this second unless I found that the data was showing that people were having a hard time being parents. Then we can offer some help. But right now, okay, we have a parenting program for you. We're going to teach you how to be a parent. I don't know. That could go horribly wrong, in my opinion. So I really like the first set of data. I think this is good. I think discipline referrals, figuring out the consequences if they were equitable, also figuring out if parents were connected with there and how we can strengthen that. And then I also like why they're helpful, except for this last bullet or second to last bullet that I would cross off, okay? Now, let's take a look at the second piece of data. Now, here's their second piece of data, and I don't love it. The second piece of data is a student survey. Anonymous multiple choice survey to 4th through 12th grade students. Asks students to self-identify by gender, ethnicity, and grade level. Likert style scale, which is like strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. That's the Likert scale. On approximately 20 statements, that's a lot of statements for 4th through 12th grade students to do. About gang activity involvement, here again, I have a problem with this. How are you supposed to get good data from this? Kids are going to lie and say they're in gangs, and kids are going to lie and say they're not in gangs. I do not like this piece of data. And then a comment section. Now, I'm not saying that this can't be used as a follow-up or a piece of data to go with some more quantitative data, but this to me feels not like it's going to yield good information. I don't love it at all. Okay. Now let's see what they said here. Why is this data helpful? To gain quantifiable information about student involvement in gangs? I'd have to disagree there. To identify groups at risk or to target programs in the appropriate audience? All right. Maybe. To target programs based on student perceptions. Now, student perceptions is good here. I think if you were going to do a survey on student attitudes about if they feel safe at school, that would be a good survey. But to survey them and ask them, are you in a gang? I don't think you're going to get, the data that shows you, what's really going on there. And then to gain anecdotal information about impressions. Okay, this is certainly anecdotal. And when we say anecdotal, it means like a little story, like it tells you a story about what's going on. But I feel like this is not what a superintendent should do. If I were the superintendent, my second piece of data would be arrest data. How am I supposed to connect the gangs to the school if I don't see arrest data? I have my discipline data. Now I want my community arrest data. I want to figure out how many of our students have been arrested for gang activity, and have those same students who've been arrested also received, the referrals for violence or fighting or whatever it is in schools, and make those connections. Again, disaggregate by age, gender, socioeconomic status. I'm always going to do that. Determine if arrests are gang related, because you could have a kid who got arrested for like stealing a candy bar at the store, but it's not necessarily gang related. And then compare that to other areas' arrest data. Let's see, do we really have a problem? Let's compare this to the school district, upstate or over here in the West or in the East, right? I think this would be a better second set of data than a survey asking students if they're in gangs. I think arrest data is going to be better for that. Now, what I forgot here, which you definitely should have included, and I'm catching it now based on my notes. I'm looking over at my notes. I go, I forgot one thing. How am I going to get this arrest data? Well, you need to do some outreach with the police department. So I would say work with police department. Of course, I would type that out much nicer here. But underneath arrest data, I would probably say work with the police department to acquire arrest data. And then work with the team to disaggregate that down, determine if it's gang related and all of that. And again, I might want to put, I forgot this, at least 3 years. At least 3 years. So have that match the discipline data, so we can kind of put them side by side and see the trends. And here we go. So those two pieces of data I feel are going to be better for this situation, okay? And now let's talk about why they're helpful, all right? So this is the second piece of that number 31. We're still on number 31 here. These data are helpful because the arrest data and discipline data can be compared to see if there's a correlation. Are the same kids getting arrested on the streets or are getting suspended from school? Disaggregated data can determine at what age group criminal activity is prevalent. It could be middle school where it's really heating up, and then we could do some programs in middle school to try to counteract that. Determine if there is indeed a gang problem. Just because the newspaper says it and just because the PTO says it doesn't necessarily, and a survey of students who say, oh yeah, I'm in a gang, there may not be a gang problem. So if there is, based on this data, now we can take action, but we have to look at the data first. And then provides evidence when we want to devise a plan of action here. All right, so that's how I would do those two things. So that takes care of, let's go up to here. That takes care of number 31, which is the data collection. We identified two sources of data. What are our two sources of data? The first one is discipline data. The second one is arrest data. That's what I would do. I would take those two and correlate, see what's going on. How are we going to get the discipline data? We're going to work with schools to get them. We're going to get at least 3 years. We're also going to figure out if parents have been called and all of that, if we followed up, and if the consequences were fair and reasonable for what was going on. And we're also going to look to see if, what kind of activity is going on. Is it chewing gum in class or is it bringing a weapon to school, right? We need to figure out what's happening there. And that's important because then we can determine trends, we can disaggregate the data and see which subgroups are involved and see if we can intervene and plan interventions there. The second type of data we're going to use is arrest data. We're going to work with our local police department. We're going to get that arrest data, at least 3 years to identify trends. And then we're going to kind of put that data up against the other data, see if we can make any connections. That's going to be helpful because then we can identify who's getting arrested on the streets versus who's getting kicked out of school. Is there some similarity there? We can also determine what age group is most effective. Is it elementary? Is it middle? Is it high school? And then we can help to plan interventions based on that. And the biggest thing is we can determine if there is indeed a gang problem at the school. Because remember, just because the newspaper says it doesn't mean that there's a gang problem at the school. All right. Now remember, you did that whole thing in bullets. It was just one statement about what kind of data you're going to collect. So the first piece of data Mr. Geraldo should collect is discipline data. And then it went into the bullets, at least 3 years, all the way down. The same thing with my arrest data. The next piece of data Mr. Geraldo should collect is arrest data in the community. And then it says work with the local police department, get at least 3 years of data to get the trends, and then on down what the bullets said. Bullets are okay. You do not have to write 18 paragraphs. Nice, succinct bullets so the reader knows exactly what you're trying to do. All right, number 32 says Mr. Geraldo responds to documents 1 and 2 in part by examining the measures the district is taking to ensure the safety of students. And here are my bullets. Identify 2 policies or 2 decisions based on the data, and for each one, justify it. All right, let's take a look at what they did here. So they went in, and I'm not going to read this to you, but it's saying the superintendent can take steps to prevent violent behavior, and they connect it to academic failure. And they're saying that the action the superintendent should implement is encouraging and supporting early identification of failing students and trying to intervene before that happens. Now, for sure, academic failure is a cause, I'm sure, for this. But we jumped right into violent behavior without even talking about the data yet. So this is a score of 3 and it works. I just think there's a better way to do this. Let's look at the second action. So here's action number 1. And remember, we do need 2 actions. So these 2, this is good the way this is set up. It's 2 paragraphs, action number 1 and action number 2. Now you could see up in action number 1, it says, kids with learning disabilities can be identified, provided with special education service early in their academic careers based on the data showing the low number of students when students are given support. So they do say based on the data here, but I don't think there's like a super big connection to the data here. It is a score of 3. That's fine. Well, I'm going to show you a little way to tweak this to make it better. And here's the second one. Another action the superintendent can take is to instruct the middle and high school administrators to be vigilant about removing gang presence from the school. That means making sure that graffiti with gang symbols or colors are removed promptly, prohibiting gang clothing. Whoa. We just jumped we just went from like looking at data to like graffiti and removing kids from school. I feel like this goes straight to the punitive and you jumped some important situations here. So I think we should scale this back a little bit. This kind of has an assumption on it that like these schools are totally riddled with gangs and stuff. What I would do, this is how I would approach this. Again, remember, we want to make sure that this is a community outreach. Just rounding kids up and throwing them out of school is not the best situation. So I have 2 paragraphs here. Here are my 2 decisions I would make. Community outreach. So once the data is collected and analyzed, and if it is determined that there is a problem with gang activity in the school, community outreach is the next step. Notice that I just said community outreach is the next step based on the data collected. Making that connection is very important, all right? Before any policy can be implemented successfully, parent and community involvement is key. The first step would be for the superintendent to build a committee made up of parents, students, business owners, and others who can help the district connect with the needs of the students and family. Notice I got very specific here, building a committee, and then I tell you who's going to be on the committee. You can't do this by yourself and just with the administrators rounding up people who are so-called gang related and throwing them out of school. We need the support and the help of parents and the community. I might even put law enforcement on this committee, maybe not. It depends on what we're trying to do here. This committee can be, in charge, should be in charge of surveying the community to see if parent programs are needed, after school programs are needed, or mentoring programs are needed. Notice I have a little grammatical error here, spelling error. That's okay. You're not going to get totally docked for that. That was something that happened while I was working quickly. It's going to happen. We know I'm spell check and all that. Don't worry. But here we can determine, all right, well, maybe the parents are saying, look, I got to work 2 jobs. This is a high poverty area. You saw that 79% are from low socioeconomic. So chances are parents are working 1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs. So maybe after school programs are needed or mentoring programs are needed. So the committee can help and plan and implement those. And remember what the PTO said. The PTO said it had resources. So I might even add another sentence here saying work with the PTO, because that connects it back to that other document of the PTO email. The PTO said it would give us resources. This is a way to do that and connect those resources to the community. All right. Committees. You are not the only person in the community. You need to make sure you bring everybody in to be on those committees. That's really important. All right. Now, after school, that should probably be hyphenated. Sorry about that. After school programs. Now, because students need a place to go after school so they stay away from gangs, the committee above and the superintendent can work on turning schools into places students can go to get help with homework, play intramural sports, work on art projects, and more. The superintendent and the committee can work on possible funding programs so teachers and others can be paid to help programs. This will help ensure that schools are where students go in the community and not turn to gangs. Notice the difference between rounding up kids and throwing them out of school and being vigilant to let's get in the community first. And I think to make this piece even better, now that I'm reading this aloud to you, I would probably even add in there, according to the data, and you can make this up, parents felt after they were contacted after the discipline referrals, right? So when we further dug deep into the data on discipline referrals, we realized that parents felt maybe helpless, or you could say felt overwhelmed with with what was going on with students or something like that. And you could say, based on that, we've determined that the school really needs to be a place for students to come after school so that they're not, out on the streets after school. So this would really help. You could also connect this to the arrest data. You could say, according to the arrest data, students were arrested between the times 5 p.m. and 12 a.m. at night. So we think the school should be open between 3 p.m. after school and maybe 7 p.m. at night. And they can get tutoring, they can work on art projects, whatever it is. So you can link this after school program to the arrest data or to the discipline data. Very easy to do, all right? And I think those are a little bit better than just rounding up potential gang members and throwing them out of school. All right. And now for number 33, identify and describe 2 factors that put a student at risk for gang involvement. Now, there too, this was considered a 3 here. They went with gender, and I don't like gender because it's discriminatory. Like, there are a lot of girls in gangs too. There are a lot of at-risk teenage girls who need support. So this kind of goes with males. And then we've got, reducing males' attraction to gangs. I don't like that because in my experience, there have been plenty of girls who were in gangs who needed support to get out of that. And so, here it has opportunities for self-esteem building. Well, all students need that. I don't think that should be, focus on gender here. Now, males do maybe, according to the data, make up most of the gang activity, but this leaves out a huge chunk of students. So I think this is not a good response. And then their second one was family dysfunction. A student's family situation also promotes participation in gangs. Is this true? Yes, it's true. However, look what this is saying here. Parents may provide poor role models, fail to teach children that criminality and gang activity are wrong. Ooh, I don't like that. That's not necessarily true. You don't have the data on that to make that determination. This is problematic because it's not culturally responsive. You have a highly diverse student population here. You have predominantly Black and Hispanic kids at this particular school. If you start going in and telling people that it's family dysfunction is the problem with the community, you're not going to get very far with people. And that may not be the situation, okay? So, I would stay out of this particular thing. I would move into a different direction on both of these. Gender only is discriminatory, and family dysfunction, you want to bring people in. You don't want to start labeling people as dysfunctional and saying that they're bad parents. That tends to be something that we do when we're not being culturally responsive. You'll hear people say often when there's a problem with a student, well, he doesn't come from a good family, or his parents don't know how to parent. That is not what we do as leaders, okay? We want to get to the root of the problem and help, not pinpoint, some things that might be the problem here. So here's my revision of the gender piece that they did. They said, mostly males are involved in gangs. I'm going to go with something different here. I'm going to talk about unsupervised time helps to, push kids into gangs. If they're always alone and there's not a lot of supervision, gang members have an opportunity to recruit. So this is what I say. Unsupervised time after school and on weekends opens the door for students to get involved in gangs. Students from low socioeconomic neighborhoods have parents who are working more than one job. Now, again, we're not talking about poor parenting. We're talking about the fact that people are working more than one job and can't be home to, do all the things that, maybe they want to do, right? So young people are often left on their own. This provides gang members an opportunity to recruit young people who do not have proper supervision. All right, now what's the solution to that? Remember, we want to talk about a cause for gangs, and this was number 33 here. So 2 factors that put a student at risk for gangs, and then for each one, suggest an action. So here's my action for that. Providing a place for students to go after school and on weekends can help reduce the allure of gangs. Student can use the school during non-academic hours. So let's open the schools. Let's make the school a place that students can go to rather than just roaming the streets and getting, recruited by gang members. They can engage in sports and arts and get tutoring and get help with their homework. The superintendent should work on securing funding through the PTO. Remember, they said we have money. All right, let's open the schools during the non-academic hours of the day. And we're going to need money to do that because teachers are not going to do this for free. Custodians are not going to clean it up for free. We need to get some money in order to do that, to keep maintenance of the school, and for extra supports during non-academic hours so the neighborhood schools become safe places for students to engage with one another and positive mentors. So I got rid of that gender thing. I thought that was just not very good. And then go with unsupervised time and how to fix that. Again, we're on more of a positive community outreach approach. We're not being punitive, and this is going to be far more proactive than reactive, right? We always want to be proactive more than reactive, okay? Is it pie in the sky? Sure. But I think this can be done for sure, especially if the PTO is offering up money, all right? So their second reason why kids join gangs is family dysfunction. And I just feel like that is accusatory, derogatory. It's not necessarily culturally responsive, and we don't have the data to support that kind of accusation. I would stay fully away from that accusation. I don't think it's the right thing to do. So I changed it to about at-risk students. And it is true, most kids who are in gangs have problems in academics. Now, that's not always true. I had a couple of students in my high school when I was the assistant principal who were brilliant. They were in the Cambridge program, and they were high up on the totem pole of the local gang. And what we did with those students was really get them involved with school and help. I went up to them. I'm like, I noticed your grades in your AP English class. Like, you should be so proud of yourself, and try to support them positively so they know that they don't have to be in a gang. They can go to college or they can get a really good job. So I think that's a way to kind of combat some of this allure to the gang. So we have here many students who are in gangs are also having trouble in their academics and discipline. These at-risk students should be identified early, and the school should have a plan for positive behavior support. Remember, just rounding up gang members and suspending them out of school is not going to be effective because they come back to school. And if we don't address the problems, we're going to have more problems. Often students who perform poorly in school are also the ones who are getting discipline referrals and getting suspended. The school has to work hard on not just disciplining these students, but also providing the support they need to achieve. So here's how we're going to do that. So I talked about the problem, and now I'm talking about the solution. The superintendent can make positive behavior support training a full priority for all teachers. So let's turn these schools into PBS schools. And maybe you know a lot about PBS and maybe you don't. You don't have to explain what PBS is here. You mentioned it. And then we say for the district, but especially for those who work with at-risk students. So let's get those teachers trained on how to engage these students so that they're more likely to do better in school rather than leave school disappointed, frustrated, and running towards the gangs, right? Instead, let's intervene in our positive behavior supports. Studies show, and here's my little anecdote, and here's my little piece of specific information. Studies show that when students receive PBS, they are more likely to achieve and are less likely to engage in negative behavior. A big reason students join gangs is because they feel like they do not belong in school. With PBS, educators can ensure these students do feel like they belong in school and continue to strive to do better. So I got a specific strategy here, PBS. I link it to my at-risk students. It is a solution to this particular problem in gangs, and it's not accusatory to one group of people or parenting and that. I just like these two reasons better. But again, those reasons listed that I didn't like actually were listed as a 3. So you would have gotten a 3 on those if you had written that. But I just think if you're going to be a superintendent and you're going to be a community leader, the last thing you need to be doing is blaming parenting and dysfunctional families. I just think that is not a very good approach to take when you're trying to get the community involved. I think we need to be more proactive than reactive, and I think this is the best way to do that. All right, so that is how you would approach this constructed response. It is not an easy task. It is difficult. My suggestion to you is to take this constructed response from the study companion and try it a different way. Try some different data you might collect and see how you might adapt what I said and what they have in the study companion on your own and see how you would come up with a solution to these problems. Remember, we always want to read the task first. So get to know what you're going to be doing for those 3 questions. Jot it down on your paper, write some notes to map it so you stay focused, and then write to the questions. Otherwise, you're going to be all over the place. Remember, keep it succinct, use bullets, be direct. Don't go around the world to say something. Be right there, say it. Nobody wants to, read 18 paragraphs before they figure out what you're trying to say, okay? So get right in there and say it and practice. Practice, practice, practice. In another video, I'm going to have some practice problems for you, and you'll be able to work through those. This is just the preliminary video on constructed response, but we will have more videos on how to do different prompts. Thank you so much for watching today. If you like our YouTube channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the notifications button so you're notified when we upload new content. Tell your colleagues we're here and let us know how you're doing in the comments below. Have an awesome day.